Welcome back to Week 5 of our Explainer series on project planning. Today, we are diving headfirst into an absolutely crucial topic, project risk management. If you've ever managed a project and felt that sudden stomach-dropping dread when something completely unexpected derails your timeline or your budget, well, you are definitely in the right place. By the end of this session, you're going to have the ultimate toolkit to tame that uncertainty. We're going to cover everything from understanding why risk management is an essential part of your planning phase, to identifying those hidden risks, assessing their actual impact, and finally, creating a rock-solid plan to keep your project moving forward.
Here's our game plan for today. We'll establish the value of risk management, figure out how to identify potential project risks, assess the likelihood and impact of those risks, develop our response strategies, and finally, execute that risk plan.
I want to start us off with this fantastic quote from Bruce Pittman, Senior Vice President of the U.S. National Space Society. He says, "Remember, what you don't know can kill your project." I absolutely love this because it hits the nail on the head, right? Proactive risk management is a survival skill, not just a box you check off on a form. Our source material really emphasizes that risk management is this iterative process that drastically reduces the number of surprises you face and prepares you for the unexpected. It's really all about pulling those hidden unknowns out of the shadows before they have the chance to turn into project-killing crises.
Now, let's think about the actual definition of risk itself. We usually hear the word risk and immediately think of disaster, right? A threat to our schedule or a massive budget overrun. But in professional project management, a risk is quite simply an uncertainty. That means, yes, it can have a negative impact, which we call a threat, but it can also have a positive impact, which we call an opportunity. Risk management isn't just about avoiding doom. It's also about exploiting positive conditions to deliver your project faster, cheaper, or just better than you originally planned.
Okay, moving right into Section 2, identifying potential project risks, or, as I like to think of it, taming the unknown unknowns.
We actually have a ton of powerful tools in our arsenal to identify risks before they hit us. You can use standard brainstorming, just getting your team together in a free-form idea collection process. You can do a document review of past lessons learned. Checklists are fantastic for capturing what your organization learned from previous projects. Then there's root cause analysis, where we don't just look at a potential bad event, but we dig into the hidden relationships that might actually cause it. And if you're running a highly specialized project, you might use the Delphi technique. It's this fascinating way to gather expert consensus through multiple iterations of anonymous feedback.
Another absolute game changer for identification is the SWOT analysis. You've probably used this in business strategy, but it is incredibly effective for project risks too. It forces us to look internally at our project-specific strengths and weaknesses, and then externally at the opportunities and threats that are just sort of lurking in our project's environment. By evaluating the project from these 4 distinct perspectives, you drastically increase the breadth of risks you're able to consider.
Which brings us to Section 3, Assessing Likelihood and Impact. We're going to score the uncertainty. Once we find the risks, we have to prioritize them, right? We bring in qualitative tools like the probability and impact matrix. This allows us to quickly map and rank risks. Basically, we assess expert opinions on how likely a risk is to happen, that's its probability, and how bad the damage will be if it does, its impact. We map those onto a grid that categorizes risks into low, medium, and high. So if your organization happens to have a low risk tolerance, anything falling into the high probability and high impact zone immediately gets flagged for a response strategy. It's a brilliant visual way to prioritize your limited resources on the risks that actually threaten your project's survival.
If you're more of a numbers person, let's talk about the quantitative risk analysis matrix. While qualitative analysis uses subjective categories like high or low, quantitative analysis relies on hard data. The basic math of risk is actually quite simple. You just multiply the probability of the event by the financial impact. This gives us a statistical expected loss. And why does this matter? Well, mathematically calculating that expected loss gives you a very real, very justifiable number to use when you go to establish your project's contingency funds.
When the stakes are exceptionally high, we pull out the heavy hitters, advanced quantitative analysis tools to mathematically model the combined effects of risks on our overall project goals. For example, a Monte Carlo analysis runs literally thousands of simulations to give you a probability distribution of your project finishing on time. Or you might use sensitivity analysis, which is often displayed as a tornado diagram. That ranks your risks so you can immediately see which specific activities or variables have the biggest potential to throw your schedule or budget completely off track. Think about how we might map out a really complex choice using decision tree analysis. Say a project manager has to decide between pursuing arbitration or going straight to a lawsuit. By mapping out the probability of favorable and unfavorable outcomes for each choice, and then multiplying them by the financial gains or losses, we calculate what's called the expected monetary value. In our source example, the expected value of the lawsuit path calculates out to $56,000, while arbitration is only $50,000. It totally removes the emotional guesswork and gives you a probabilistic, data-driven way to make a really tough call.
Let's dive into Section 4, Developing Risk Response Strategies. Time to create the game plan.
We generally use 4 sequential strategies to handle negative risks, or threats. Step 1 is simply to avoid the risk entirely. Maybe you change the project scope or schedule so the threat just no longer exists. If we can avoid it, Step 2 is to mitigate it, which means taking active measures to reduce its probability or impact, like cross-training backup staff. Step 3 is transfer, where we shift the liability to a third party, usually through an insurance policy or vendor warranty. And finally, Step 4 is accept. If the cost of mitigating a risk is actually higher than the impact itself, you might just choose to accept it and set aside a financial reserve just in case.
But remember earlier when we talked about how risks can be positive? We have a completely different playbook for those positive opportunities. We want to actively exploit them to make absolutely sure they happen. We might enhance them to increase their positive impact, or share them with a partner who is better equipped to capture the benefit. The takeaway here is never ignore the upside of uncertainty.
For the risks we do choose to accept or mitigate, we absolutely must build contingency plans. Contingency planning answers the nitty-gritty questions: what, where, when, and how much action will take place. Our sources shared this incredible example of a high-tech company introducing a new product. One of their key suppliers was based in Toronto and posed a massive delivery risk due to potential winter weather. Their contingency plan? They literally kept a chartered plane on standby just in case overland transport was delayed. I know, it sounds a bit extreme, but when time to market is everything, having that plan documented and funded totally prevents panic and keeps the whole project moving.
All right, Section 5, Executing the Risk Plan. Let's bring it all together. Your risk management plan is essentially your master playbook for this entire process. It formally documents your risk register, which is basically the evolving database of all your identified risks. It assigns clear roles, maybe even appointing a dedicated risk officer. It sets your organization's risk thresholds and secures your contingency budget reserves. But most importantly, it establishes trigger conditions. A trigger is the specific, predefined warning sign that tells you, okay, it's time to launch that contingency plan.
Because remember, risk management is proactive, not reactive. Risk control means we are continuously monitoring those risk triggers during every single regular status meeting. You're asking, are our assumptions still valid? Have any new risks popped up? By constantly watching the horizon, we ensure that the moment a trigger is tripped, we can deploy our contingency plan smoothly, efficiently, and totally without panic.
Let's wrap things up with some key takeaways on taming uncertainty.
The bottom line is this: a truly great project manager anticipates the unexpected. First, recognize that risk management is a proactive survival tool. Second, systematically identify your risks using tools like SWOT and brainstorming. Third, assess them using probability and impact matrices so you can focus your energy. Fourth, develop a firm response strategy to avoid, mitigate, transfer, or accept those threats. And finally, rigorously monitor your triggers so you can execute your contingencies flawlessly. Before we officially wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. Think about your day-to-day work for a second. How will you step up and address the biggest unknown currently lurking in your own project? Seriously, go find that risk, give it a score, and build a plan to beat it. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep taming that uncertainty.